Oh yeah. So the date is the 25th of June 2019. Just continuing on with the story. So I'm actually in Paris in a hotel for work. So I just thought I'd use the time. I might do 2 videos, we'll see. But so yeah, just picking up where I left off. So I did have another phone call that I made. And I don't know if I mentioned it in the last video. I haven't watched the last video through thoroughly before doing this one. But I called a very close friend of mine that lived locally, Chris, and he. I'll probably do a video with him to talk through the conversation and what he went through. But his reaction was like he sort of cut me off, and he was like, after I told him, and he was like, "Don't go anywhere. No, don't go anywhere. I'm coming up." Not that I was going to go anywhere. There's a couple of parts about his call, or my call, our conversation that we've talked about since, and it'd be good to sort of him to share firsthand. But so then I sort of knew he lived not too far away in Farnham. We lived not too far away in Farnham, so I sort of was like, oh right, he's come in, and I'm like, okay. And I can't remember the order of those phone calls, but that happened at that same time. Charlotte, the midwife, Charlotte, the pediatric nurse, had arranged for a midwife to come and see Bex to examine her, just check on the baby and everything, which completely made sense, So I knew that was coming. So I remember being back in that family room. I remember distinctively being sat down. And like I alluded to in the last video, this was like the worst part for me, like the moment, the part of despair, which I'll explain. So Bex was stood up. Bex's mum and dad were in the room as well, and Bex said, "I haven't felt the baby move or kick since it happened, or since we found Amelie." I don't know how she worded it, but that morning she and she was, so the next day, so this was on a Sunday, the Monday Bex was full term, meaning that 9 months had gone by and she had 4 weeks left, and within that 4 weeks the baby can come and it's fine, it's all healthy and everything. So what that means, obviously Bex is heavily pregnant, and as well as like limited mobility and stuff. She's also got constant movement, like the baby was always moving and doing stuff, kicking and reacting to things, and so for him to not move for a long time and stay, I suppose, quiet and still was just unheard of, out of the ordinary. So Bex was stood up in front of me when she said it, and then I put my ear to her stomach and I listened, and I couldn't hear anything. And I quite often would listen to, or put my ear to the Bex's stomach and just hear, you'd hear movement. Sometimes he'd like push her or whatever, and he wasn't as active. When Amelie was in the womb, she used to be able to nudge her in different places, and she'd nudge back. The boy wasn't like that. He'd just sort of like take it sort of thing, but he would react. Anyway, so I put my ear to it, and I don't know if I really gave it a proper listening to. I know it was very important to me at the time, so my assumption is that I did, but Bex questions that. So anyway, listened, nothing, no sound, no movement, nothing. And around that time, I don't know if it was before then, shortly after, whatever, but the nurses brought a phone charger in for me so I could charge my phone. So I sat down and the phone was charging next to me. I remember it was a lime green cable, and I was just sat there and I was just thinking, well, we've lost did I think that we had? I don't know, but what if we lose him as well, you know? And then I don't know how much time passed or what really was going on at that moment, but I basically didn't really pay much attention to anything outside of what was in my head. I just sort of sat there, and then Bex got taken by the midwife. So the midwife came down. They actually took her into one of the little rooms, the wards. I don't know if there's a ward. I can't remember what the bays. One of the bays, paediatric A&E bays. So on the corridor, first one on the left, I remember, and Amelie was the third one on the right. Amelie was still in there when Bex went into the other one. It was, we're talking, I don't know, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, nothing had drastically changed in this time since we last saw her. And so they took, I didn't know they'd taken Bex into them, but they took Bex away. Bex was like, are you going to come with us? And that was the most important thing to me at the time, was to know that the baby was okay. That's all I cared about at that moment. But my reaction was, no, I need to wait for my phone to charge. I don't know why, but that's what I said. And Bex looked at me, and then her mum said, "Are you sure? You sure you don't want to go, Steve?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'll wait for the phone." And then I think then I was left alone. I don't know if everyone left me, but I was then left alone in that room. Bex's mum came back in again, and I think a nurse came back in again and said, "Do you want to go? Do you want to go and check? Do you want to be there?" And I was like, "No, it's okay. I'll be fine." And I just sat there. And I remember that was like the moment of despair for me. Like, so what I mean by that was nothing had any value to me at that time. Nothing at all. Nothing. I didn't care about anything. I didn't care about job, money, car, house, relationships with people. Nothing mattered, and I've never felt like that before. And I know. Everything just felt worthless, and I'd never in my life have I felt anything like that before. So I remember thinking, and I still think now, that I can see how, and not that I would or did, but I could see how people in that situation who feel like that, so whatever it is that's caused them to feel like that. Obviously, mum was the loss of my daughter, and then thinking I'm just about to lose confirm that I lost my son. I remember thinking, I can understand why people in those, or how people in those situations self-harm or commit suicide. Not that I did self-harm, not that I obviously didn't commit suicide, but my whole life up to that point, I'd never had any sympathy at all, or very little sympathy for people who committed suicide and self-harmed. I just thought it was attention seeking, it was selfish. That's another word that would come up, that I would think of. People jumping in front of trains, and all I would think of was, rush hours now extended, and never really thought or understood what it is that drives a person to that point. And now I don't know if I get it, and now I understand what it feels like to feel completely worthless, everything to just have no value, and it's horrible, it's awful. And so I was in my head, I was sat there just thinking, what do I say to Bex when we get told that baby's dead? Obviously what happens, but then how do I face Bex and talk to her about that? I remember thinking that, and I remember thinking then I then have to call everyone else, and the thing was, like, in my head I was trying to sort of calm myself down and sort of say, like, well, we don't know, but let's fucking wait and find out. And I don't know everything about pregnancy and stuff, but what I did know, and what I do know, is that there have been cases of women miscarrying children for going through traumatic things. You know, something happens to them, they're involved in something like a car crash, and not necessarily a bad one, but it's enough. And what I did know was that happens, and what I'd just gone through, and what Bex and I had just gone through that morning, was the most traumatic thing I could think of, and I'd ever been through. And so the logic followed that, well, it would make sense then if that was the reason for a miscarriage. So yeah, so like just an awful feeling, and I sat there, and then I didn't snap out of it at all. I sort of was going to say I snapped out. I didn't snap out of it, but then I thought, oh, I don't know why it came to me. I could move the charger. The charger plugged in. Now at this point, or just before this point, 2 plain-clothed detectives came into the room as well. 2 women, roughly middle-aged, really like just very polite, very compassionate, just like everyone else. And you wouldn't have known they were detectives. You would have no idea. And they introduced themselves to me, and they then explained that, you know, they're there to support us, and if we needed anything, and they're very sorry that, you know, what happened, and you know, and then they also explained that the other detectives that are at the house are going to come and see us, and I was just like, yeah, that's fine. And it dawned on me later, I think while I was at the hospital, that the reason there were 2 detectives was that they were both watching Bex and I, you know, like if we had decided to flee and like run off, and obviously we didn't, but it makes sense that that's the protocol. And again, like I've said in the previous videos, none of this stuff ever bothered me, but it was just, you know, that was the reality, that was something that was happening. But the people that were doing those things were absolutely, were doing it with complete respect and compassion, and almost that they didn't want to do it, really, just a massive amount of sympathy for what we were going through. So yeah, that happened. I remember I was alone at that point, going through these thoughts, and then these 2 women came in. I can't remember their names, but they stayed outside the room, down the hallway, but looking, you know, so they could look. I think that they were stood in the corner, so they could see down the hallway where all of the bays were, to where Amelie was, and then down the hallway this way, so they could see our room, and that was basically where we would only go anyway. So that made sense that they stood there, but out of the way, you know, sort of in the shadows, as it were. Not. I never felt they were watching over my shoulder or anything like that, but they were there. Anyway, so then I remember, thinking, oh, that cable plugs in. So I took it out and I walked, and I asked where's Bex, and they told me they're in that first bay on the left. And I walked in there, and enough time had gone by that Bex was lay down on bed. The midwife was with her with this machine. Bex was like all strapped in, and I could hear the baby's heartbeat, and it was completely overwhelming, and I burst into tears like uncontrollably. Like I couldn't talk. I completely lost control for the first time. So I'd cried prior to that, but that was like a relief, because I knew from that point onwards, things couldn't get worse. Everything was gonna be okay from there. So it was a massive relief for me, and I remember walking towards the plug socket first. That's the first thing I did, was plug the phone in, and then I went to Bex, and I was crying my eyes out. I didn't even say anything, and we just hugged. And I remember thanking the midwife. So I'm gonna stop it. I'm gonna stop this one there. Almost 15 minutes again. I keep doing this, but yeah, I'll stop this one there, and I'll pick up the conversation after on the next one. All right, thanks.